Okay, let's have something for the background for this video. Oh, I know. Oh, you can't even see that in the light. Oh. Okay, I really need to get better lighting or something, because that's a sad display for a steelbook, that is. So let's talk about Forspoken, a game that released a week ago at the time of recording. I think it'll be just over a week by the time you see this video. It's a single-player RPG that you could get on PS5 and PC, and I personally have been following it for just under 2 years now. I saw a trailer in a Square Enix Presents presentation, the same one they announced Life is Strange True Colors in, and I saw Project Athia, and it was given the name of Forspoken at that point. It had had a couple of teasers, I think, before then, but I hadn't seen those because I didn't own a PlayStation. I didn't bother watching State of Play. So I've been following the game for roughly 2 years, and just from that very first trailer, I knew immediately that I was going to like the game. I loved the look of it, I loved the vibe, and I really liked Frey right from the get-go. Like, I think at the first line she spoke in the trailer, I was immediately hooked. And so for the last 2 years, I've been waiting for the game to release, but I've got to be honest with you, when the game was about to release, I nearly didn't claim my pre-order. I pre-ordered it a game, you put a £2 deposit down, then you pay the rest when the game actually comes out, and I was very close to just not doing that and letting the £2 go into store credit, because I'd seen all the reviews for the game, and it did knock me a little bit. So to give you some context, in case you didn't already know, when Forspoken came out, it got bashed across all social media platforms. Reviews were mixed, I would say. There was some that really did think the game was great, but a lot of them thought it was really bad, and the main thing was the dialogue. That was a huge thing people took issue with, and there were 1 or 2 clips that got shared around Twitter and YouTube that people used to kind of judge the whole game, as if 2 dialogue clips are enough to ruin a 20 to 30 plus hour experience. Yeah, I don't know about that one. I don't know about that. So what I wanted to do is talk about the game in a little bit more detail, because I gotta be honest with you, I really liked it. I thought it was brilliant. I say I thought it was. I'm still playing it at the minute. I've got a whole bunch of open world stuff to do that I honestly wasn't going to, but as soon as I started it, I kind of couldn't stop myself. So I'm really excited to keep diving back into it. It's a busy week at the minute, so I'm struggling to find the time, but I'm trying. I really am. So I just want to talk about the game in its different perspectives, the things I liked, the things maybe I didn't like so much, and just give a general overall opinion of it. So I want to focus off firstly by talking about Frey as a character, because Frey has been one of the most kind of polarizing parts of this game. Frey is played by Ella Balinska, who's an actor who's popped up in several different things. She was in the Charlie's Angels reboot most recently. That's what I think I recognized her from. So I kind of knew who she was a little bit going into it. But her character Frey, she's had a few criticisms, and mainly again it's down to the dialogue. She swears a lot. There's a lot of swearing going on, but also there's a lot of kind of jokey dialogue happening, and I've seen arguments, people saying, you know, they don't really know what audience they're going for because they're making, like, MCU-style humour combined with a lot of swearing. Like, that doesn't really leave a great target audience overlap, and to be honest, I feel like just the cringy dialogue made people want to make those comments and those references to the MCU. Like, the MCU didn't invent that kind of dialogue. It's popularized it for sure, but it didn't create it, and it won't be the last thing to ever do that. So just because Marvel's the big juggernaut that people want to point at the minute, especially because people don't like Phase 4 as much, it's weird it's used as a criticism. I really don't get that, I have to be honest with you. But Frey as a character, she was designed to be an authentic New Yorker, and from what I've read from people who actually live in New York, she does act a lot like people in New York act. But the swearing, I thought I would notice it a bit more. I mean, I swear quite a lot myself when I do like Twitch streams and stuff, and I noticed she was swearing a bit, but it didn't really bother me or concern me, and I also didn't feel like it clashed that much with the dialogue that she had. Because the main thing of the game is that Frey can talk to Cuff, which is the thing she has on her bracelet. It's a sentient thing that basically gives her magic powers. And they have lots of dialogue, lots of banter. You can even choose how much banter they have in the game, which I think is something some people missed. You can have default amount of banter, you can have increased banter, minimal, so only like enough to progress the story. You can choose how much they talk. So if you don't like it, you can just turn it off, which is also great. But I had it on default for most of the game. I've turned it up since to hear the extra lines I've missed out on, and I can see why that might be a little bit excessive. There's some lines in there that are a little bit like just trying to be jokey but not working. There's one I know people have pointed out that I heard where Cuff points out that you picked up some consumables, and she goes, "I'll try not to consume them all at once." That's a dad joke even I wouldn't make. But, you know, there's only a few of those. I don't see the big issue with it. And the funniest thing was the clip that was shared the most, where she was mocking Cuff, and like they were mocking each other's accents, and she ends by calling him stupid. I watched that clip the first time before the game came out, and I laughed at it. So What does that say about me? Do I just enjoy things more? I don't know. But in terms of a character with her story beats, the thing I loved about Frey was that she wasn't a typical hero. I'm going to try my best not to spoil the whole plot of this. I should have said that sooner, but I'm going to try not to spoil the plot. I'll have a section at the end that'll be marked like spoilers. At least talk about it a little bit, not too much. But the interesting thing about Frey as a protagonist is she's a hero that has the hero role thrown onto her, and she very actively rejects it at every moment given to her. And it can almost be enough to put you off, I feel like, if you're not really vibing with that kind of character style, but it felt unique and it was a fresh perspective. And, you know, sometimes people don't expect the hero role, they get it flung onto them, and with a bit of adaptability, they're just into it like it's, you know, second nature to them. Whereas Frey was constantly saying, you know, I've been given these powers, I didn't ask for them, I don't want to be here, you know, I've never had anyone to look out for me my whole life. I mean, the whole point of her character is she's someone who didn't have a proper parental figure. She was left at the Holland Tunnel when she was born, and she doesn't know who her parents are. She never had anyone to look after her, so she hasn't really learned to care for anybody else because no one else cared for her. And you see that reflected in this hero role. People are putting this responsibility on her, saying, you can save us, you can be the hero Afi, and she's like, I don't care. I don't want to be. I don't care what faith you got in me. I look after myself. I care about numero uno. And that could come across really jarring, but as a character beat for her, I thought it really worked. I genuinely do. And watching her eventually settle down, it taking longer than it might normally, and eventually assuming that role as the plot advances and things change. And there are some surprising twists in there, some twists I didn't even see coming. There are a couple of things I kind of wondered, like, do I know where this is going? Is this a bit of a hint? But there were a couple of things there where I was like, wow. Okay, didn't see that coming, which I like. I always love when games can twist a little bit and not be super predictable. There'll definitely be people out there who said they saw stuff coming, but people will always say that. I genuinely think the twists in this game were actually really good. And for the sake of not spoiling it for people who might pick this game up, I won't spoil them for you. That's another thing. I've heard people saying that they'll wait till the game gets cheaper. As for the price tag itself, I get it. I really do. £70 or £60 or however much people are paying for it in different countries, I can understand. It does feel like a lot, but I like to judge it based on how much time and enjoyment. Sometimes a game can cost a lot, but if I get enough enjoyment out of it, enough satisfaction that isn't super long, I don't mind as much. But usually the big thing is how much time I put into a game. And I have put a lot of time in already. I have already like a day played in Forspoken, and I've got plenty left to do in the open world. I feel like I'm definitely getting my money's worth there. So if you want to wait for it to get a bit cheaper, you'll definitely get your money's worth. You pay £30, £40 for it. Honestly, you absolutely would. So wait for it till it goes on sale if you want to, if you're not too sure, but that's just something I'll put out there. But as for the other characters in the game, one slight nitpick I had is I didn't feel like there were a ton of interesting characters aside from Frey. You have Auden, who is kind of like the main secondary character. She's someone you meet very early in the game, and she interacts with Frey quite a lot. There's Pilo, or Pilo, wherever you say his name. Honestly, his character was never someone I cared about that much. He was someone who liked Frey from the very beginning, was like, oh, she's going to be our hero, and he was very much kind of her number one fan with like the foam hands, trying to like cheer her on almost. There are a few other characters like that, like there was a librarian called Johidi, who I quite liked, but she didn't have a massive role in the game. A couple of other characters who are almost spoilers, so I don't want to get into that too much. But I just felt like there wasn't really an interesting cast of characters, more than a lot of side characters you could have some conversations with, but didn't matter too much, if that makes sense. So while I really liked Frey, I personally would have liked a couple of extra characters just to go alongside her, but I don't think that breaks the game in any way. I think the story can stand quite easily on its own with the characters it's got. It's just an addition I would have put in personally. But one of the things that's been the most polarizing, and I say polarizing because the dialogue's been almost completely negative, there's not really been a mix there as much as I've seen, but the combat. There are a number of people who really like the combat in the game, and a number of people who seem to think that it's really bad and they just can't get the grips of it. I genuinely think with time you get more used to the combat system. When I first played Forspoken, it was the demo that came out in December, and I remember thinking, there's a lot going on with spells here, and I don't really know what the best ones are, how I'm using them, what's going on. Granted, I didn't play the demo tons, because I played through the main objectives of it, and then just shelved it, because I was like, I don't want to play it too much, I'd like to save most of my playthrough for the main game. But in the main game, you have a lot of different magic spells, but the game does a very, very good job of spoon-feeding you them. You start with very, very little spells, they explain a little bit about them, and then you build on them from there. You have upgrade systems, you can pick new spells, you can then learn ways to upgrade them by completing challenges. Sometimes the challenges aren't super clear on how to complete them, so that is one thing I would like improving in some places if possible. But generally, you can upgrade your powers, you can go for specific things, and also if you don't like certain powers or you change your mind, you can actually refund the points you spend into them for most of the abilities. So for instance, there's a fire type of magic, and there was one that was involving more kind of like hand-to-hand combat. I didn't really feel it, so I got the points back, put them in something else immediately. It's nice to have that kind of refreshing system where you can actually go, I'm going to take those points out, put them somewhere else, and just experiment and mix around. It's almost like making builds for something like Payday. It's interesting that you can fiddle around a little bit. But the idea of the magic, you have these different types of magic. I mean, it's not really a spoiler, I can talk about them. There are 4 key types. You have Frey's-based magic, you have some fire-based magic, some water-ish based magic, and some lightning/illusion-ish based magic. And my favourite 2 easily were Frey's base and the fire base. Both of those bases of magic were really interesting, mainly because I got to mix the ranged abilities with Frey's and the more hand-to-hand with the fire one. The fire one had a really powerful sword ability that I liked, and I loved changing between the 2 of them and just kind of messing around, seeing what different things it could do. There's a lot of primary damaging magic, also support magic to back you up, and you also have these ultimates you can trigger that genuinely just destroy any enemies in sight. You can summon tendrils from the ground, you can make the whole area into a pool of lava, you can quite literally Darth Sidious the area with the lightning power base. There's some really cool stuff you can do there. And I honestly just thought that while I was playing with all these, experimenting with all these spells, that the combat system felt really fresh. It was something new and different. I liked the magic of Skyrim, but it's very linear, it's very basic. You can't really mix and match in a very easy way because you have to open the spells menu and pick a new one and then go along. Whereas on my controller, I can pick up my PS5 controller, I can be playing along, hit a button, and then new spells, hit a button, new spells, insta-toggle. And it felt far more fluid, far more controllable, and also far more enjoyable. And then you combine that in with the parkour system, which is something that's very big in this game, the way you can move around, run fast, leap, all those kind of things. And you can then have this really cool fluid movement system where you're bouncing around the place and casting spells and basically dodging anything that comes your way. And it doesn't feel like a challenge. Sometimes in games where you have to dodge or parry or counter, I myself personally will go, there's a lot of effort I'm having to put in here. I'm just going to focus on attacking and just go for it. Skyrim's a big one. I just already made a comparison to that. I know Skyrim's combat system is not exactly aged that well, but I never bother with blocking. I'm just like, no, keep swinging my sword. If I take some damage, who cares? Eventually I'll get the kill. Whereas in this, I'm like, right, let's time the dodges, let's get the hits, let's do this. And I really felt like I was getting into the tactical nature of it and using the magic to its full potential. And that was really enjoyable. I loved that a lot. But then combining those parkour abilities with the open world itself, I actually quite like. And it's weird because there's another open world game that had some criticism levied at it, which was Arkham Knight. Nearly got it wrong there. Because Arkham Knight didn't have any NPCs, and they said, they kind of passed it off in the story as all of Gotham's been evacuated. But it felt lifeless. It did feel lifeless not having civvies in there, like wandering the streets that you could kind of walk around and be attacked or witness Batman doing some cool stuff. Whereas in Forspoken, the plot's written in such a way where, no, you don't expect there to be people out there in the land. It's medieval for one thing, so you're not going to have swarming people anyway. But the idea is that there's this curse out in the land. It stops people from being out there. I'm not going to go into too much detail. But there were enough enemies, enough different landscapes, and that kind of thing where I was always doing challenges. There were always missions to clear out areas, to go into dungeons and fight bosses, or to do a whole range of other stuff. Befriending cat familiars, for one thing. Loads of little familiars that are cats with wings or horns, and every time you befriended one, it would meet you in a safe house later on. You'd have cats flying around lamps and stuff. I'm not a pet person, but the cat content in this game, delicious. But it honestly felt like the world wasn't empty despite there not being really any people out there aside from the enemies, which is a weird thing, because I don't imagine that's very easy to master. But I didn't even realise there weren't people out there until someone actually brought it to my attention in a review comment on Twitter, and I went, oh yeah, there aren't people out there. Guess I just don't care. It was genuinely the reaction that went through my head because I was so busy bouncing around as Frey doing what I do. I didn't even think about it. I wasn't bothered by it. It didn't faze me, and now I've had it brought to my attention. I still don't care. Are you getting the impression yet that I really like this game? I'm trying my best to go into as much detail as to why I did without spoiling it. How on earth have I forgotten about the most important part? The music. Oh boy. The music of this game is absolutely perfect. I think there were 2 composers in the game, but one of them was Bear McCreary, who you no doubt know has done the God of War soundtrack, he's done the Walking Dead soundtrack. He is a legendary composer, and the theme that was composed for the main game, for Frey's theme, is one of my favourite video game themes of all time. I love the melody, I've been humming it in my head on and off for the last week plus, in fact longer in the lead up to the game, and it's just a beautiful piece of music, but that whole tone of like the fancy vibe, again, it does feel a little Skyrim-esque, but it fits beautifully and it really matches the tone. It's one of the standout parts of the game, to be honest with you. In fact, I'll just play a little bit of Frey's theme that I really like. There's a standout bit, I'll just play it right now. Like that just kind of magnificent vibe to it. You hear that at different points throughout the game, especially there's a bit in the final battle where Frey kind of arrives you'll know what I'm talking about if you've seen the story. And there's a more triumphant kind of orchestral version of it that plays. And I was like coming along going, yeah, da 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 da. Like, it's great. I love it. It's brilliant. So music, huge part of that game, and huge part of why it's so good. Have to talk about that. Absolutely amazing. So I've talked about Frey. I've talked about the gameplay, the combat, the movement system. So I want to wrap up by talking about the story a little bit, and that requires spoilers. So to give my overall thoughts before the spoiler section, which is exclusive for people who either don't care or have already played the game, Forspoken genuinely has been completely misinterpreted in my opinion. Granted, some people will not like the dialogue. I can see why people don't like it. Don't mistake me. The banter between Frey and Cuff is definitely an acquired taste, and there are some lines between them I don't vibe with. There are a few that I was like, I see what you're doing there, that doesn't land for me. But about 80 to 90% of it landed for me, or at least was like, okay, I see what we're doing here, and I liked it. The story's great, the characters are great, even if, like I said, I would have liked a few more. I love Frey. She's genuinely one of my favourite protagonists I've seen in the game in a while because of how unique she is and the perspective that she presents to you. I think there's so much this game has to offer, and I really hope that in, say, a year's time, with a few sales and a bit more reflection, people will look back on this game and see that it was a really good game and people bashed on it too much at launch. I can honestly see that happening. Could become a bit of a cult classic game. I'd love to see that happen. I really would. But if that's where you tune out, then thank you very much for watching. Well, let's move on and talk about the story very briefly, because there's just a couple of things I want to talk about. So, first off, just get straight into it. Frey being Tanta Cinta's daughter. I feel like I should have seen something like that coming, and I did wonder in my head whether we'd find something about the parents who were going along, and I did wonder, like, what's going on here? But they did a very good job of making you feel as though the magic came from the Cuff and not from Frey. And they wrote it into the story that the magic would only present itself in Frey naturally when the need arose. And the need didn't arise when she first found the Cuff. She didn't know even magic was a thing. So why would she suddenly have powers in New York when she was about to... I mean, to be blunt, she was going to kill herself. We know that's what she was going to do. So why would she suddenly need to be shown she has magic? There's no point in that, right? She sees the Cuff gives her powers, that's all we need to know story-wise. But I love that once the Cuff ends up being Susurrus, this big demon villain, that she doesn't have her powers, we find out she did have the magic in her. And it's only once she finds out her ancestry and what's going on there that she then has that power unlocked within herself. I love that, although I do think the section where they explain the whole story went on for far too long. That was a really long section where even I was like occasionally checking my phone going, okay, can we speed this up a bit? I loved what they did in the story and explaining it, but it did feel like that dragged on a little bit. I would have liked that to have been a bit more compacted personally, but that's just me. And because I didn't see the magic powers coming, I couldn't predict that Frey was a Tanta's daughter, and least of all Tanta Cinta, the one who was like the beautiful one, who we hadn't seen until like the end of the game. And that was a really cool twist. I love that it was being built up and explored a little bit. And then also that she was the dragon. Did not see that coming in the slightest. Soon as Susurrus pointed out that the mother was defending her daughter, I was like, are you kidding me? The Alduin lookalike is Frey's... Okay, fair enough. And somehow, within like about an hour or two of that being revealed, and then the final battle with Frey and Cinta against Susurrus and Cinta dying, genuinely made me cry. There were a few points in the story where I really got emotional, like the stuff of Cinta saying to Frey about being a daughter and how she'd always loved her and she never wanted to let her go and all that. I don't know why, but there were quite a few beats in that story where I genuinely was crying, like, at several points. Not, like, profusely, but it had me shedding tears, and I was, like, thinking, the story's hitting me, man. Like, why is it doing this? Like, it's well written, I do think, genuinely, and I like the way the plot's laid out. And I thought that was just a really cool element to it. But I love the build-up that the Cuff is the bad guy, because, I mean, you probably could see that coming. That is a more predictable story element. That's the one thing I would pick out and go, what if the thing that talks to you is the thing that ends up being the bad guy? I can see people predicting that. But I think it was done in a really interesting way that, you know, it is indirectly your fault. All the Tantas had managed to banish Susurrus and put them into their cuffs, and that's what drove them mad. And as you bring them all together, it's almost like... I mean, to make a comparison to some of the Doctor Who audience here on my channel, like Resolution, the Dalek was split into 3 parts. When it's brought back together, it becomes a Dalek again. It's like that. You bring all the cuffs back together, Susurrus reaches full power, boom, his trap's broken, he's back to being a villain. I think that's a really good build-up. One that you don't necessarily see coming in that way, but works really well narratively. So I loved that. And just the final battle in Sepal, having, you know, Frey riding the dragon with that big triumphant theme in the background playing, and also Tanta Frey, her look was amazing, loved the spells, loved the abilities, and just everything about it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. The only slight thing is, I'm not too sure how I feel about Susurrus going back into being Cuff, and then them kind of having the same dialogue lines, but you look at it from a different perspective, because now you're like, Cuff's kind of almost mocking her in some ways. There's extra lines, obviously, from saying, you know, I'll drive you mad the way I drove everyone else mad, but I don't know if that lands as well for me. I kind of wonder... I think I'd be more interested to see what they explored that in a sequel if they do a Forspoken 2, but knowing the reception, I'm not sure if they will. I would be interested to see where that goes, because right now I'm like, that's the only thing. I would have rather they just killed him off and Frey just didn't talk to Cuff. I think that would have made it a bit dull in the open world not having the conversation, but I think also by that point, having as much of it in the story as we did, you might not have minded the conversation being removed because that had served its narrative point and now you didn't need it. Because a lot of the lines get repeated anyway. It's stuff we've often heard before, so I wonder how it would have looked without Cuff there altogether, personally. Because, I mean, she just tattoos the pattern onto her arm instead. The cuff's gone, but there's a tattoo that then talks to her. I don't know. That's the one thing it lost me a tiny bit on. But all in all, really liked the story. Thought it was really, really strong. Obviously not without its faults, but very few games are without their faults. But I really, really liked it. So those are my thoughts on Forspoken. I've tried to just kind of barrel off everything in my brain because I've had this building up in my head for a week and I've really wanted to talk about it. And that was actually the driving force for rebooting the second channel. I wanted to talk about this and I knew it wouldn't work on the main. So if you have enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up. I'd really, really appreciate it. Show me you enjoy this content and would like to see more. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. I will talk about anything and everything on this channel. If it's something I like and I've got a passion about and I feel like you'd enjoy hearing me fanboy, nerd, freak about, whatever it might be. But either way, thank you very much for watching. My name is Troy, and these have been my thoughts.